I'll get started. I'm going to kind of more or less lead this one, and Steve will provide some color commentary as we go along. I've asked him to challenge me on some of the concepts or ask questions where it's not clear. So he may chime in with some of those. If you have questions or things aren't clear, please let us know. I'm open to that at all times, and so you can let us know. Now, as I get started here, kind of the first things that I'll do is I want to come back to some of the fundamental concepts, and then we'll talk about the fundamental principles. Now, these are most explicitly outlined within ISO 9000, and maybe many of you know I'm on the working groups for both ISO 9000 and 9001. And what directly is impacting me right now, as we understand, quality management systems, is this idea of the fundamental concepts. In the current version, the 2015 edition of 9000, we have 5 concepts outlined in section 2.2. Now, again, many people just think of ISO 9000 as kind of that document for definitions, but it has these concepts, and then we'll go into the fundamentals that sets the foundation for many quality management systems, including in med device, ISO 9001, 14001. All these things set the concepts behind those management systems. Okay. And so that's what I want to talk about today, because one of the things that you quickly start to realize is if you focus on the requirements of the quality management system and you're just concerned about compliance, you end up losing the effectivity of the quality management system. In other words, you're not getting the return on investment. As you're spending money, whether it's the people or the processes, you spend money on certifications, there has to be a return on that investment. And if the concepts and fundamentals aren't well incorporated into your processes, then you lose that return on your investment. Okay. And so, again, the current edition of 9000 2015 has these fundamental concepts: the concept of quality, and then the quality management system. Quality meaning how do you produce things that meet requirements. Okay. The quality management system is a set of processes that integrate with one another to achieve an outcome. Right? Then you have to understand the context of your organization. Most pointedly, this often comes through mission, vision, and your quality policy, right? Your policies. The context of the organization, what are you trying to achieve? What does your organization do? Okay. Then you have this idea of interested parties, people that are around your organization that are interested in what you produce, whether they're customers, they might be people in your supply chain, they might be regulators. All of these things, these people are interested parties, right? And then you have the support concept that you have to have some people to do things. They have to attain and maintain some competence. They have to have awareness of how they impact your product. And then you have to be able to communicate, whether it's communicating through marketing or communicating through instructions for use. All of these things are part of your communication. And then, of course, feedback is a part of your communication as well. Okay. Now, Steve, am I being clear?
Yeah, I think I think these are important concepts because they're. I often joke in a lot of my presentations about the portions of the standards or particular standard like 9000 that nobody ever reads,
Right.
yet they contain all this great fundamental, foundational information really that is just critical to understanding the rest of it. We tend to just jump into the tell me what I've got to do parts.
Right.
And you can't get those right if you don't understand some of these basic fundamentals to understand this is the context within which this is all being created. So I appreciate that today we're talking about this because I find this to be a problem when we deal with clients, when I do audits, when I teach, that people don't seem to have the fundamentals down, and then they're surprised why their quality system is either ineffective or inefficient, or they're in trouble with the regulatory bodies or their notification organizations or their standardization certification bodies, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think it's important that people understand this stuff is there, and you need to really grasp it well to understand everything else that you're actually applying.
Right. And one of the things that I put into this was, and Steve and I we've been talking about is maybe we'll put ourselves out of business and other consultants out of business by disclosing some of these things that are behind the scenes. It's also a frustrating part for me where when there's other consultants that don't have these fundamentals down, these fundamental concepts, and they're trying to just say what they believe the requirements are. And I'm like, wait a minute, let's back up and look at what the actual concept was that is behind the requirements. That's the value to me of being part of the standard revision process, is that we have to have the foundation and the concepts to understand what requirements we're writing and why we're writing them. Okay. Now, in particular, one of the things I want to introduce with this, because I have some of the knowledge of being part of the working group doing the next revision, while ISO 9000 2015 has these 5 concepts, the next edition being published, and it's intended to be published in December of 2026, the current version, the committee draft, has 19 concepts that are in this section now. And so I think through the user surveys, the understanding of what's needed to support the quality management system requirements has been greatly expanded by the user survey and that feedback into the standards process. So we're adding such things as process management, integrated management systems, the circular economy, emerging technologies, innovation, the concept of risk and risk-based thinking, change management, the customer experience, which is much greater than customer satisfaction, knowledge management. Your organization knows how to do some things and needs to be able to maintain that. Managing information, and then expanding this support area for the people aspects of support. So all of these are, is the feedback of what people have questions about often. And so in this next revision of ISO 9000, you're going to see the expansion of those things to help organizations out in the understanding of what the quality management system requirements are meant to do. Okay. All right. Moving on to the next section, which is called the quality fundamentals. There are 7 fundamental principles. The first one, and often you can think of when standards writers start off with things, the first things are usually what they might deem the most important. And so the first thing they look at is customer focus. Are you listening to your customers? Are you understanding and interpreting requirements correctly? Are you answering their feedback, their questions? Are you looking for improvements to your customer experience? All those types of things go into that first fundamental principle. Then the next one they look at is leadership. And the previous editions of ISO 9000 had this section named management, and they recognized that having a quality management system requires some leadership, requires the focus. Okay. The next one being the engagement of people. You have to have some people resources that you're engaging. It's not just that they're a resource, but you actually have to get what many organizations will call buy-in, right? That's the engagement. It's not just telling them what to do, but rather you engage them in making a good product, right? The next piece being the process approach, and we'll go into that particular one a little bit deeper. This is plan, do, check, act, with the integration of risk-based thinking. So that process approach. Okay. The next piece is improvement. And then evidence-based decision-making. come back to that, particularly when we talk about the risk-based approach, risk-based thinking. And then relationship management, which is management in both directions, right? Management with your suppliers, managing relationships with your customers, managing your relationship with other interested parties like regulators. Okay. Now, when I say that there's these fundamental principles, most people will ask, well, what does all of those things mean, or how did they put it together? This section is put together with these 7 different pieces, with first a statement of what it means. What is customer focus mean to the organization? What is leadership? All of these things, they start with that statement. Then go into a rationale of why that's important to the quality system in your organization. They then amplify that some more about key benefits. So what's the benefits to your organization of engaging with these principles? And then even the next step, they give you some possible actions of how to implement these principles. So without looking at a quality management standard, you can get these fundamental and key aspects of it in place. And this is what I would encourage you to do, is look at these things, these principles, how you're implementing them. And then you can go back and look at the standard and talk about the requirements. Because if, again, I'd advocate, if you put these principles in place, you're going to meet the requirements of the standard. Okay. Steve, you look like you got something there.
Yeah, well, this is probably my favorite slide in there, because right in the middle is my favorite topic, the process approach.
Yep.
And I think that's a prime example of what I was talking about on the previous slide. So many people, they've heard this term, but they don't read any of this about it. And then we end up with a quality system that is a pile of procedures, and there's no interconnectivity. And surprised, why doesn't my quality system produce good results? Why does it seem so inefficient? Because you didn't think about it as a system, as a system of processes, which also means you can't do the next one, improvement, very well. If you can't see the processes across the quality system, you end up sub-optimizing each one. And I actually have an article we're going to be posting in the next day or two on EQMS systems, but I make a comment in there about putting, for those of you who are, motorheads, if you were to put drag slicks on the back of an economy car, it doesn't make the economy car any faster. Matter of fact, it may actually cause problems. And that's the problem. If you don't see the entire system and the processes and how they interconnect, you can't do improvement. You can't even, really be very effective. So I just think, again, it's so important to understand these fundamentals and read these parts, read those early portions, the section 0 of your standards, and for things, and get a copy of like ISO 9000, which has all of the fundamentals, all of the terminology defined for you, so that you understand what you're looking at in these other, standards.
And unlike other people, I will not advocate you getting ISO 9000 for the terminology, because there's a other free way to do that in the online browsing platform from ISO. You can go to iso.org/OBP, online browsing platform, and you can put any word in there and it'll give you the definitions from multiple standards. So there's no reason for you to buy the ISO 9000 for the definitions for those words.
I will put the link in the chat here in just a second.
But
We
what
do
I
have a
would say
question.
is,
We do have a question in the chat.
Yeah. And so again, ISO 9000 is much more important for the concepts and these fundamental principles, right? And yeah, so I see the question from Melissa. Thanks for the question on the publication. I can't give you a date when you're going to see it, but there will be a draft international standard at some point, probably early. Well, I think it's probably going to be mid 2025. Might be a little bit sooner. But we have the next meeting on working on the drafts is in July. It's actually in Detroit at AIAG, so the automotive people are hosting it. And both ISO 9000 and 9001 will be worked on for that week in the middle of July. Is the next version. Then sometime after that, after the comments are addressed, they'll go to a draft version, and that'll be the first time that it's a public piece. Okay. Yep. And that is for both 9,000 and 9,001. They are both on they're on the same revision cycle together, moving forward, right? And if I think I might have said 2026, I actually meant December of 2025 or January of 2026. So it'll be the end of next year that the publication is intended. They put it on an accelerated 24-month cycle because they don't see many changes in requirements, but there is some need to revise it to match the harmonized approach. So as other standards have been updated, the harmonized approach or harmonized high-level structure, whatever you've heard it called, has changed some, and so they're moving some of that forward. All right. All right, so we're through the concepts and the principles. Again, I can't emphasize this enough because all of these standards are built on those concepts and fundamentals. So 9,001, 14,001, 50,001. I can add in others, 27,001, 45,001 for environmental health and safety. Even 1345, while it's not the same structure, doesn't follow the harmonized approach these other guys do, the concepts and fundamentals are still what the standard is built on. And tell you, because we wrote design specifications for each of these. And so what we start off with is that those concepts and fundamental principles that are in ISO 9000, and those have to be upheld. And so all of the requirements flow from that. So that's why it's important. It's why it's important for you to understand. Okay. I will flow then to the next piece. There is an ISO TS 9002, which is a guidance on the application of 9001. It's just simply guidance for that application. 9004, though, takes that to the next level in talking about best practices. And so, I mean, you can hire us as consultants, you can hire anybody else as consultants, and we have some of the good ideas. But when you get together a group of experts and they write them down for you, that would probably be something to take a good look at, because you have all of these experts sitting around the table and discussing what the best approaches are and then writing that down. Okay. I also want to emphasize the 10,000 series that many people forget about, because people will ask us, how do I do this or how do I do that? The 10,000 series gives you a bunch of these, and I'll just list some of them off for a second here as you go through that 10,000 series. So if you have questions on customer satisfaction, it's in 10,001 in the code of conduct. Complaint handling is in 10,002. Dispute resolution in 10,003. Monitoring and measuring of processes, 10,004. Business to business consumer commerce transactions. Quality tools is in 10,009. In organizational quality cultures in 10,010. All of these have these greatly expanded concepts and ideas, again, written by a set of experts. So you could spend, $100, $150, $200 maybe on one of these ISO standards in 10,000 series, and you're going to save yourself hours and hours just of your own work. But, because it's, again, a set of experts, you can replace some of the consultant work that you get. Now, I'm a big advocate of making people self-sufficient, so I don't need you to rely on me. We're glad to help you out, glad to engage with your organization and help explain the concepts. But you also have some, I'll call it self-help out there in these 10,000 series. Now, Steve, am I making you angry at all?
No, no, no. I still think there's a role for us.
Yeah.
Right. The
Well,
gray
and
hairs or
obviously,
no hair, it certainly, says we've been around the block and have seen enough to help provide, good guidance on application. But yeah, again, if you I hate to use this term, but I sometimes joke about, there are too many quality hobbyists out there. And if you're going to be responsible for some portion of your quality system, you really need to be a quality professional. And that includes understanding all of these kind of documents and having them in your library or your toolbox, however you want to think of it. You should have them all, not just, the very targeted ones like, well, we're 9001 certified, so I have 9001 and nothing else. Again, you can't just put the, 9001 in a, isolate it like that. You have to have this conditional or contextual information
well,
around it.
and I'd volunteer because I mean, I will tell you that probably 80% of the people involved in writing 9001 and these 10,000 series of standards are other consultants. And so I mean, we talk about often that, some of it is making work, but um, many of us approach it in a different way. Because we're there for the conversations, we understand the concepts that are behind the scenes. And so we can help organizations when they have a difficult auditor. And that difficult auditor is trying to tell them they need to do something in a certain way. And we can say, wait a minute, this is what the requirement actually means. Here's the support from a 10,000 series or ISO 9000 or whatever it might be, because we're so familiar, because we've been in the writing and drafting of these things. That's the value I think we can bring in explaining this for you, especially as organizations like US FDA, adopting ISO 1345 in the new QMSR, helping understand some of the concepts. Because I will tell you, in as we go through this process, and helping FDA answer the questions and comments that came back, um, we had to do a lot of explaining to help them understand the concept, because many of the people that are at FDA now were not involved in writing ISO 1345. And so it still behooves us to be there and give that explanation. So we can even help you out with FDA inspectors and others that are not making a correct interpretation. Okay. All right. So hopefully we're bringing some value to you guys in understanding the importance of the principles, the fundamentals, the connection to all these other standards as well. Okay. And so I wanted to focus, as Steve said, probably what I consider one of the most important pieces of a quality management system, and that focus on the process approach. Okay. And this is the PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act. I actually tried to get them to change this to the /A to be a just. I was not successful in that. But planning, and that's a key aspect that FDA has always recognized, right? Because they didn't require a quality manual in the previous QS reg, right? Obviously it will with the QMSR because it's in 1345. But that planning aspect, but they did require planning. Again, understanding where you're going to go, that you've created a system that tells you what the next step is. It's again that interconnectivity of your processes, that it says when you create a design and development plan, you have to have document control. You have to have these other pieces in creating that system and that group of related processes that you plan to connect them. Okay. In doing, you're going to exercise those processes. What most of us find out is if the process hasn't been exercised, there's probably some errors in it. Okay. And the first time you have to do a recall, or the first time you have to do some sort of a CAPA action, you discover there's maybe some weaknesses in the processes. And it's usually in the interconnections and how things are put together, how the information flow is accomplished, right? And the accomplishment of that output. Now, again, many of your processes The output of that process is the documentation that says you did something, right? The basic concepts of most of the ISO processes is that you say what you're going to do and then show that you did what you said you were going to do. And so that plan and do is that accomplishment of the output along with the documentation, the records that show that you did something, right? Then you come back and you check it and say, did we actually achieve what we intended? You measure those, that internal, external processes, and you get the stimuli back of we were successful or we weren't successful, or we need to make these adjustments. Then you make those adjustments, and then you start from the beginning again in running that process. Make those adjustments, and then that feeds right into the planning, and then you do and check and act again. And you do this in a continual way. Okay, you never stop doing that. All right, Steve, what do you got on it?
I don't think I have much to add to this one. Again, it's just, it is funny when I always point this out to people, right? That the standards, the quality management standards are based on the PDCA cycle. And I'm really surprised by even people who've been around for a while. It never dawned on them that that's what's in there. So again, it's another one, it's in those early sections. They remind you that the whole thing is based on that, Deming-Shewhart cycle. And you should recognize that, even though it's not being called out directly throughout the standards, but it is the basis for it, right? That's what continuous improvement is all about.
And I'll say, many people have probably seen in our regular postings, we went through the Deming principles, and now we're doing the Duran trilogy. But understanding these concepts behind it are so key to it. And I'll use some examples from sports, right? The great sports teams, the first thing they do is focus on the fundamentals. I ask people all the time, what do you see when the basketball teams, professional basketball teams, first come out to the court? What's the first thing they start with? They start with layups. They start with that fundamental, putting the ball in the basket. Everybody starts with that. From the junior leagues of the Pee-wees on up to the professionals, they all start with these basics, because the basics is what gets you through all of the rest of this stuff. Okay. All right. What I wanted to incorporate with that PDCA cycle is risk-based thinking, the risk-based approach. In the current edition of 9001, this is what we incorporated into the process approach. You started to quickly realize that the plan, do, check, act cycle by itself, without some other pieces, may not be the right decision. And this supports really the evidence-based decision making, right? You have to have something to base your decisions on. When you do that check and the act through the adjustments, it has to be based on evidence. Okay. What we're saying here is probably the best evidence that you can use is, what's the risk? Okay, we're saying get rid of that arbitrary approach. It's not just because that's the way we did it before, or that's the way we've always done it, or these types of things that are more arbitrary. Management review, you have to have at least annually. What's that based on? That sounds like I just want to meet a minimum requirement. Okay, we'll tell organizations, is that sufficient to take care of the risk of your quality management system not being suitable, adequate, and effective? And you should base it on some risk, right? Your organization has an audit coming up. Your organization is releasing a new product. We want to make sure that our risk management processes are good, our design and development processes are good, all of these types of things, and get rid of that arbitrary approach. It just is time to, right? So base it on some sort of risk. Most organizations will quickly find out that probably at least quarterly, they need to revisit and understand of the quality management system as suitable, adequate, and effective in order to make effective adjustments, right? You want to get to things, it's like preventive maintenance, right? I want to prevent the problems before they happen. So let's do that. Now, again, that's why the preventive action went away from ISO 9000. is because if you effectively apply a risk-based approach, you are suitably doing your preventive action. You're preventing problems from happening. Okay. The other piece that the risk-based approach allows you to do, it allows you to right size your process, right? And what I'm saying here is large organizations with lots of people need a lot more control, right? Because there's a lot of different ideas or different thinking there. And so they need to apply some more rigid controls, more details in the processes and written work instructions and so forth. When you have two people in an organization, the two people probably both know what's going on across the whole organization. They know how to build the product. They know what the requirements are. They receive the feedback directly from the customers. When you have a large organization, you have to have methodologies for communication. You have to have systems to put the information into. You have to have, the investigations have to be more robustly documented, and putting all of these things around it. So as your organization grows, the amount of things that you have in your system have to grow. But again, if you have a small organization, you can say, when an auditor says, well, you don't have a process for shipping, it's one product, it gets put in a box, and what's the risk? What it really allows you to do as observations come up is say, what is the risk of that? And do I need to do something about it? Right? And so if the risk is low, acceptable, then you're good. If you have sufficient explanation for you to understand it. Having the auditor understand it, or the auditor be able to follow the process, is not the requirement. It's for your organization, and you're giving your organization's knowledge, the competence of your people is all the risk-based approach. Okay. Now, one of the things that often comes up for organizations in the risk-based approach or risk-based thinking, this is not doing FMEAs in your quality management system processes. There's no formal approach or process that outlines how to do risk-based thinking. You really start off with the questions of what could go wrong, and then how can we avoid whatever going wrong. You give simple examples, in every quality management system has some risk-based thinking incorporated into it. Document control. You can have a paper document control system, but there's still some risks associated with that. Many of us found this out through COVID, right? If you were just running on paper and everybody's working remotely, how do you get something signed? How do you get it reviewed and approved if it's on paper? You have to go to some sort of electronic document control system, right? Paper can get lost. Paper burns. All of these things are risks that are associated with that. If I put my document control up in the cloud and it has regular backups, I'm mitigating those risks of loss, right? So these are some of the things that you can do as you say, what can go wrong? And then how can you avoid those things going wrong? That is the key part to the risk-based approach. And so if you put these things together now, the PDCA, the process approach, along with risk-based thinking, the risk-based approach, okay, as you put those things together, as you do your planning, you're thinking about what can go wrong. How can I avoid that? Preventive action being incorporated. Okay. As I do things and I see things go wrong, what's the risk associated with that? And how can I avoid that? Okay. What things do I see? You're checking, well, what things do I need to measure in order to understand what the risk is associated with this? Okay. And of course, the adjust is, okay, now that I'm adjusting, what new risks are associated with the new processes before I implement them? And so that risk-based thinking and risk-based approach is key to be integrated with your process approach. All right. What do you think, Steve?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is obviously another hot button for me as well. I've been doing a lot of presenting on explaining the difference between risk-based approach and risk management. And I've really, the last couple of years, I've changed my own thinking on this as well. But my students know this, right? That too often they ask, so how do you do this? How do you apply that part of the standard or the reg? And my first answer is always, well, it depends. And they kind of look at me quizzically, and then I say, well, what do you think it depends on? Right? And the answer is it's always risk, right? That is the answer to every question, is to apply your risk-based approach. And if you've not applied risk-based thinking, you haven't even considered what are the risks, then yeah, you're probably going to struggle with all the things you talked about earlier, right size your QMS and individual procedures and processes, just figuring out the degree to which you have to, jump certain hurdles, right? How much inspection do I need? How much confirmation of competency do I need? How much control do I need to put on suppliers? It's all based on risk, and it's all right in the standards of the regs. If you watch the wording, it's there. Where they want you to do formal risk management, they will say risk management. Where they want you to consider the risks, they'll use terminology like appropriate to the risks involved. There's your sign,
Proportionate.
right?
Yeah,
And again, but if you're
proportionate.
not thinking in this context, again, you're not paying attention to the fundamentals, those things aren't going to jump off the page at you as, oh, they're telling me right here what I have to do. And now it's up to me to figure out, so what does risk mean in this context? And I love that you picked doc control as an example, because I often throw that one out there going, what are the risks of doc control? People kind of think of it, that's such a, ubiquitous
It's
and
such a
well understood
straightforward
process,
process.
right? Right, yeah. What do you mean risks? There's no risks of doc control, right? And then we get into the whole discussion of what are the right metrics, what does effective mean in doc control? And it's not cycle time. But
Well, and
again,
don't
right, you have
forget,
to understand the risks, and then you'll be able to figure out the right metrics to follow.
everybody uses the risk-based approach. You talk about how often FDA comes for an inspection. If there's a significant risk, they will be back every 2 years. If the risk is lower, you might not see them for 3, 5, 7, 10 years or more, right? They use the risk-based approach in deciding who they're going to inspect. In addition, your auditors, right, when they decide, they see a nonconformity, what's the risk of that? Is this a major? Is it minor? Or is it something that's just, yeah, it's worth mentioning, but I don't really see a true nonconformity in the output from this, right? So that's how you get the rankings of those nonconformances that they find. Okay. So, I mean, everybody's using this. It's the best way to do things. And so we have to stop with the arbitrary approach. I gave the example of management review, but I can talk about preventive maintenance and calibration. Many of the things that are time-based, there has to be a risk associated with it. Calibration, it doesn't tell you the next measurement is good. You calibrate at a future point to know all of the measurements in between were good. Well, how much product did you build in that time that was measured? That's the amount of risk associated with it, because all of that could be bad, right? If your future calibration shows that it wasn't working. Okay. The same thing with preventive maintenance. The manufacturer of that piece of equipment has no idea what your use is, right? You do. And so when it's going to have some effect on your product, or at least you should. So you might start with the manufacturer's recommendations, but at some point you should adjust that based on risk, right? When did it actually start producing? When did it have an impact on your product? Now we can adjust the cycle, right? All of these things that are time-based. CAPA investigations or complaint investigations, in particular, because the investigation doesn't have anything associated with it with regard to time, right? You have to decide how much time is sufficient. A low risk might be 90 days, medium risk 60 days, high risk 30 days or 10 days or whatever it might be, okay, to get those investigations done. And then what governs timeliness from that point? Well, you decide how, because your plan decides how long it's going to take. That's the timeliness measure. And how long do you allow the plan to work? Well, what's the risk? How quickly do we have to get this done? What resources do we have to apply to get it done quickly, maybe? Those types of things based on risk. Okay. So, I mean, you can do it all of these different places. There are no processes within your organization that doesn't have some risk associated with them. Because if it didn't have any risk, we wouldn't have any controls like work instructions, procedures, processes, all of that kind of stuff. That's why we have the processes to manage the risk. Okay. I think that's probably the end of our formal presentation discussion that I wanted to outline to get some of the concepts together. So I think we're at that spot where we're going to play a little bit of the stump the expert, or what is your problems, your pain points, things that we can answer for you. And you got both of us here, so hopefully there's some good questions out there, and maybe Steve, you could even kick it off if you have some things that people often see.
Well, yeah, one, just to see if anybody's got anything, that they want to share or wasn't clear.
Feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
We probably should have set up a poll, because I'm like dying to ask how many people actually have read some of these sections. But let's go a different way there. Has anybody encountered, right? You think about, as you're working within, or you're managing your quality systems, and I know there's a variety of people here with different roles. But understanding the context here, when you think back to some of the the CAPAs that you've had to deal with, or if there's been any findings, as you look back at those in hindsight, are you thinking, you know what, the problem wasn't something superficial, it was that the organization hadn't spent time to understand the fundamentals, right, to create a better process? Has anybody encountered those kind of situations?
We have a bunch of shy people on here.
No.
Come on, Melissa.
Hey, thanks for the presentation, and thanks for bringing all of this to my attention, I guess. So I don't know if you guys remember, I've joined other presentations. So I'm quality lead at a SAMD company.
Okay.
Yep.
And definitely, I would say this is an issue that we're facing. And I like some of the tips that you guys have been giving, because a SAMD company starts as a piece of software. So it's more of a technology, I would say, what do you want to say, mentality when they're building the company. And then at one point they're like, oh, hey, wait, now. So some of that fundamental thing, I think, hasn't been baked into the quality management system that we put in place. I mean, it's growing and it's maturing and things like that. But I would say maybe some of these fundamentals, as you mentioned right at the beginning, might be something that needs to be revisited. So this is like my thought process right now after listening to the two of you and the examples and thinking about it. Probably a good thing to go back. And we did have some kind of I would say, advice coming from some auditors about making sure that we have the documentation about how the interconnectivity of the processes is laid out. So that was one example you guys gave. And yes, that's happened to us. So.
Well, I think often, and again, get everybody on the same page, because not everybody is in med device even, but SAMD is software as a medical device, is the area of concern. You see it. I mean, we work with a lot of clients that are working with applications that aren't even medical devices at this point, right? And so, people start worrying about FDA, the QS reg, the ISO 1345, sometimes ISO 9000, all of these pieces. But I would say that whether or not you choose certification, whether or not you choose to place your product on the market under the QS reg, these fundamentals will serve you well from a business standpoint. And so as you get to the customer focus, asking your customer what they want, that's going to help you build the correct product. We talk about verifications and validations. I mean, that'll help you then do your verifications and validations to test your product at the end. to put all of these things together. So whether or not you choose to get a certification of your quality management system, I would advocate that these quality principles will serve you well in your business. Okay?
Yeah. Yeah. This is definitely something I've been explaining, I would say, over the past couple of years, is that I'm not here to implement a quality management system so that we can say that we have it, but actually I'm here to serve the business in doing what the quality management system is built, is to deliver to the customers what they want in the end, right?
That's correct. And sometimes your customers may demand that certification, right? They may demand that you certified to 1345 or demand that you certified to 9001. Okay, that's just another customer input, right? So even just getting that cert, because I'll tell you, I've had several of our clients where they're coming at us and they're saying, well, I've heard I need to get 1345 certified. I'm like, well, where are you selling your product? In the US? Then why would you spend $20,000 to get that cert? It's not required. You have to have an adequate quality management system. It doesn't have to be a certified one. Okay. These are some of the practical approach that we talk about from the fundamentals. So we will infuse the fundamentals into your piece, but we're not going to say get certified to 1345. I know that makes me a little bit of a heretic, but these are some of the things that we can talk about in the concepts. All right. Karen, it looks like you unmuted yourself. You got a question there too?
Well, no, I guess I don't have a question. It was more of a piggyback in that, you know, what you've both taught over the years is to just tell the right story. And your procedures and your processes have to allow you the ability to do so. And the more and more, you know, like that I've been implementing that, it's made things more efficient, but we still have that quality aspect, that compliance aspect, because it tells the right story. And I just always like to listen to your risk-based discussions, because it's just something that you've just always have taught. And I've been able to build on that and produce a lot of good work over the last several years. So
thanks, Karen. Thanks for
Yeah,
that.
thank you.
I mean, I think some of the things we're talking about is you have to tell that story, right? But the story has the background of the fundamentals and principles. So it has to have that as kind of the supporting piece. And so tell a story that relies on those fundamentals and principles, and then you'll be compliant without any problem. Steve, did you want to add to that?
No, I think Karen summed it up very nicely. Glad somebody's paying attention, which is good. Melissa as well. So it's always good to hear that. So, what else? What are some of the finer details we could expand on for you guys?
Yeah. And I guess, Steve, what I'll volunteer too, we've talked about, some people being our students and stuff like that. Both Steve and I teach in the Master's Science and Medical Technology Quality for St. Cloud State University. And so if you're interested in improving your professionalism, some of the concepts that we teach, you can look at individual courses in that program, or a certificate, or the full master's program. Are some other things that we bring forth. So, and of course, our involvement, my direct involvement in the working groups for revision of the standards, I have a direct input on what goes into the standards, both 9000, 9001, 1345. We're working on getting as the ISO working groups get the customer feedback on changes. I'm also on TC 262, which is risk management. Because we're so intimately involved, and I bring that back, and Steve and I discuss it, and we've created a training program and talked about it with our consultants, that we can bring that information back to help our clients, in essence, look around the corner, see what's coming, make sure that everybody understands these fundamentals and principles, so that we keep our clients out of trouble. So with that context too, are there other questions out there? I know Ivona, you're here. Call some other people out. Michelle Nechtel, Randy, you're usually not that quiet either. So are there some questions that you guys have?
I don't have any questions, Mark. I just want to, I can say the program in Sleep Pod is an amazing program. And
Yeah.
tremendous takeaways and learning opportunities there.
Sure. Randy, do you have something?
Yeah, I don't really have any questions, just comments. I concur with everything that you're saying. You know, we have a risk-based procedure that we created for the quality system, and we use an RPN type of system to measure some of the metrics on complaints, CAPAs, non-conformances, that type of thing. I guess, you know, one of the struggles that we have right now is we've had quite a bit of turnover within the company. And so it just is challenging to try to replenish the knowledge base all the time. So I don't know if you have any comments on that, but that's kind of where I'm at, is just trying to maintain that knowledge base right now.
Some of my advice on that, Randy, would be to, you know, as you do your exit interviews, as people are leaving the organization, they can tell the story of some of the things that went wrong. What risks did they help, you know, mitigate? Why did they, you know, why are some of these processes in place that they have, so that organizational knowledge doesn't get lost? You know, you try to do that as lessons learned. When I mean, to me, it could be an activity, and most people will give a 2-week notice, right? And so they're starting to transition their duties. One of those things might be, here's the lessons I've learned while at LP, while at whatever organization, so that you can learn from those.
Hello, I have a question not related to the topic of this meeting today, but we know FDA is moving to ISO 13485. Do we know it's going to be, are we going to get like you remember when ISO changed from whatever version to another, there will be a gap? Are we going to get something like this exactly word by word? This section will become that to align, to know exactly what will be the changes? Any idea?
So the FDA is changing from the QS reg to the QMSR. The date of that transition is set as the 2nd of February, 2026. Okay. There is a gap analysis document that I helped write.
Oh, perfect.
AAMI. It's AAMI, so the Association for Advancement of Medical Instrumentation, TIR, the Technical Information Report 102. 102.
And
okay.
Is it
and that shows the comparison of the QS reg to 13485 and 13485 to the QS reg, showing the differences. And there's some explanation of some of the concepts in the front of that have that might be the more difficult concepts to understand, like risk-based approach and that kind of stuff.
Oh, wonderful. So this is available for purchase?
You can purchase it from AAMI store.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We just finished an internal audit yesterday, and that's how I'm exhausted. And one of the things was, okay, how soon are you going to maybe open a preventive action to show, to start looking into how you're going to bring your documents in line, even if it's such a long,
This is where I would advocate quality planning again. So creating a quality plan that identifies any differences. Because I've been so intimately integrated, from my perspective, there's not much changing here.
Okay.
It should be pretty straightforward. Some of it, most of it really will be in terminology. And your understanding of the concepts. So things like DMR, the device master record, under the QS reg, doesn't exist under the QMSR, right? And so you have to understand that's a design and development plan, right? Or it's a medical device file. So that's some of the pieces in the terminology differences. So, but I think that's pretty straightforward, Ivona.
Okay.
Okay. And as always, you can always ask us for some assistance if you need some.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, Lisa, you've been unmuted for a while now. Do you have a question there?
Yes, I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Technology sometimes overwhelms me. I just want to say thank you for this webinar today. Having spent the last half of my career here in medical device world, and started out in the ISO 9000 world, 9001, I was introduced to the fundamental concepts and principles and have watched that standard change throughout the years. And I just am always amazed how, when you're in the medical device world, especially in my own little world, that's all I can only speak from what I've experienced, is those concepts and principles are often overlooked. It's ISO 13485, QSR, and everything's done for compliance. And it's like, well, why don't we focus on effectiveness and what is good for the business? And I pulled out the, the standard before, and I was kind of met with resistance, and then I fall guilty of it, because if it's not part of my everyday world, then I put those, the ISO 9000 on the shelf. So this was really a great reminder, and you presented it very well, clear and concise, and kind of is motivating me again to dust off my 9000 standard.
Nice. I like it.
Well, and keep that in mind as the next version comes out, and you see the draft standard. Thanks, Karen. Take care. As you see the draft standard come out, look at what those principles are that are coming forward, because I will tell you that while it doesn't change the requirements much, because and I'll just tell you straightforward again, I don't see the requirements changing much, but it could change your understanding of the requirement as you look at that, those concepts and that fundamental information, that kind of stuff. And as always, you can message us through LinkedIn. You can go to our website, QRxPartners.com, and Steve and I both, you can click on our picture and you get our email. Feel free to send us those types of things. We're glad to help. We'll take the time to, the few minutes that'll answer emails. Doesn't cost anything for you guys. We're glad to help and make sure that we're sharing the knowledge out there. Steve, anything else?
I just in the chat, I put the link to our LinkedIn page. If you're not already following us, you should, because we post a lot of this kind of stuff on a daily basis. And it gives you a way to connect with us again if you have follow-up questions.
And of course, the recordings and clips from the recording will be available on our website as well.
All right,
Thanks,
we're at
everybody.
the end here, so I want to be cognizant of people's time.
Yep.
But
Take care,
great
everybody.
having everybody on here. Appreciate the attendance and the involvement, and we look forward to seeing you all at the next one we do next quarter.
Yep.
If you have suggestions for topics, we'd be open to that as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, Mona. Bye.
Okay,
Bye, everybody.
bye-bye.